are mean things happening in this land. There are mean things happening in this land.
But we don't care, we're man and don't allow, 'cause justice will roll down anyhow. The time's fulfilled and the reign of God is near.
Prophecies have got to go. Ain't no way we're backing down. We're rising up, the time is now. Come on, clap your hands.
We're more at peace when we're at war. It was a falling, now more of her.
All right, welcome everyone to the Freedom Church of the Poor. My name is Ashley Huffnagel, and I'm with United Workers, a multiracial poor people's human rights organization in Maryland. And I'm here with fellow United Workers members, Terrell Askew, Amy Bielheim, Sydney Bond, and Father Ty Hollinger, and we're honored to be leading tonight's service. I'd like to start by grounding ourselves in a reading of the mission statement for the Freedom Church of the Poor. And Reverend Tani Allgood is going to go ahead and read that.
Mission. The mission of the Freedom Church of the Poor is to be a spiritual home for movement leaders and a place to help nurture moral leadership for the struggle to end poverty, systemic racism, ecological devastation, militarism, and the false moral narrative of Christian nationalism. We reject the religion of the empire, which blames the poor for their poverty, pits poor and dispossessed people against each other, and promotes the false narrative that poverty cannot be ended, only alleviated through charity. The Freedom Church of the Poor began meeting in March of 2020, just as the COVID-19 pandemic was breaking out in the U.S. The Freedom Church comes together in these times out of necessity to end a system that is killing us. We are a loose network of workers, poor folks, pastors, organizers, thinkers, and fighters. We are bound together by our conviction that the world does not have to be this way, and that this is not as good as it gets, because God created abundance for all, not just for a few. We are interfaith, interspiritual, and non-religious, and come from every region of the country. We welcome all who wish to be a part of the movement and all victims of empire.
Thank you, Reverend Tani, for reading that. So tonight's service is part of a larger season dedicated to the theme of Learn as we lead. The slogan, Learn as we lead, walk as we talk, teach as we fight, describes a model of organizing that understands the struggle as a school for forging the leadership we need to challenge and transform this poverty-producing system. This evening, we will be sharing how United Workers puts this theory into practice through what we called our Year of Reconnaissance. Last year, we engaged in a systematic and collective process of listening to poor and working class people across Maryland, learning from partner organizations, doing research and studying together in order to decide on our next human rights campaign. We were looking for a campaign that would help us unite poor people in our state across historic lines of division, race, region, and partisan politics. We were looking for a campaign that could help forge us and others as leaders in a broader movement to end poverty led by the poor. And this past December, at our annual membership assembly, we voted. We voted on a broad campaign framework to demand our human right to health, by making visible the ways that poverty and the denial of our basic needs is killing us. This in one of the richest states in the richest country in human history. Tonight, we're going to do some readings from scripture, watch a video produced by our media team, and hear from some leaders in the organization. But first, I wanted to go a little bit back further in time. Part of learning as we lead means studying the history of struggles of the poor and dispossessed that came before. Struggles that challenged the powers to be and demanded freedom from poverty, exploitation, and oppression. Whether these resulted in major advances for our class or brutal defeats. While it's so important to learn from struggles of the poor from around the world, the places where we are organizing are deeply shaped by these histories. And understanding these histories can be valuable to understanding our current political and economic landscape. This is no more true than in Maryland, where United Workers is based. Today, we might not call Maryland a battleground state, but during the antebellum era and the Civil War, it very much was a battleground and fertile ground for forging two of the most brilliant abolitionist leaders of the time, Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman. As the northernmost southern slave state, Douglass was enslaved in Maryland, working as a ship caulker in the port of Baltimore before stealing himself north to Philadelphia, where he would become a leading abolitionist thinker, writer, and orator. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery on the eastern shore of Maryland in Dorchester County. She was called Moses for her role as a conductor along the Underground Railroad. She not only escaped herself from slavery, but heard God's call to help free others. She led 13 missions behind enemy lines to help 70 enslaved people escape bondage. And although illiterate, Tubman was a key strategist and military genius in the movement to end slavery. John Brown sought her advice and guidance as he was planning the raid on Harper's Ferry in West Virginia, right on the border with Maryland. During the Civil War, Tubman acted as a spy and a scout for the Union Army, playing a decisive role in the Combahee River raid that freed over 750 enslaved people. As those who may be familiar with United Workers now know that we draw great inspiration from Harriet Tubman. We even have a t-shirt that some might recognize that has her face on it with the words "lead" underneath. In a society that tells us that the poor are incapable of thinking and doing for ourselves, Tubman tells us otherwise. In a society that tells us that fighters can't be thinkers and thinkers can't be fighters, Tubman tells us otherwise. In a society that valorizes shooting from the hip, acting first, thinking later, Tubman tells us otherwise. She was serious, and she knew that meant being able to outsmart and outmaneuver the enemy. So last year, as we embarked on our year of reconnaissance, we looked to Harriet Tubman. The dictionary definition of reconnaissance says a preliminary survey to gain information, especially an exploratory military survey of enemy territory. We looked at this well-known image that some of you might have seen before, this painting by the artist Paul Collins, showing Harriet Tubman leading a band of escaping slaves along the Underground Railroad. And we asked ourselves, what do we see in this image? What does it tell us about her leadership? What does it suggest about her reliance on her reconnaissance and knowledge? And if we want, we can take a minute or two, and if people want to write in the chat or just even come off of mute and share, what are you seeing in this image? What does it tell us about her leadership and her knowledge and use of reconnaissance? She knew the way, Adam says, she knew the way and knew there was danger all along the way. Yes. She is protecting as she leads, writes Maureen. All right, well, we're going to keep this image in our head and this idea of Harriet Tubman and her leadership as inspiration for us as we move along to the reading of the scripture. So I'm going to hand it off to Father Ty. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ashley. So pull up the slides for the first reading. Just that we are in also in this time of study in the fifth Sunday after the Epiphany, or the fifth Sunday in Ordinary Time. This is one of those Sundays where the first reading in most common is different than the Revised Common Lectionary in the Catholic Lectionary. So our reading is from Job this Sunday. And if there was a volunteer that would want to read Job either in English or Spanish.
I'll read.
Thank you.
Do not human beings have a hard service on earth? And are not the days like the days of a laborer? Like a slave who longs for the shadow, and like laborers who look for their wages. So I am allotted months of emptiness, and nights of misery are appointed to me. When I lie down, I say, when shall I rise? But the night is long, and I am full of tossing until dawn.
I think there's another slide.
My flesh is clothed with worms and dirt. My skin hardens, then breaks out again. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and come to their end without hope. Remember that my life is a breath. My eye will never again see good.
And the next reading comes from the Gospel of Mark. If another volunteer would like to read this, either in Spanish or English.
As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and then she began to serve them. That evening at sunset, they were brought to him all who were sick or possessed by demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring town so that I may proclaim the message there also, for what it is I came out to do." And then he went throughout all Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons.
Thank you, readers. I hope we can see it's kind of an interesting pairing to have Job and Mark together. What do they have to do with what we're talking about? Learning as we lead, about the difficult but necessary sometimes march through swamps, through difficult terrain on the railroad or the pathway to liberation. Job, one of the most insightful breaking open the book of Job I've recently discovered was a short little book, but it's very hard, very difficult reading, but it's a great book called The Labor of Job. And it was written by the Italian communist Antonio Negri. And he really started writing this book. He didn't call it, he explicitly says it's not necessarily a commentary, it's more of an intervention with Job. um, during the time of his imprisonment. And so he was in prison for, I think, a little over 4 years. To make sense of the circumstances in prison for his political activities, would look to this book of Job to sort of unpack and wrestle with um, those events that culminated in his imprisonment, and perhaps reflecting on the long course of victories, but mostly about defeats. Defeat in the struggles, defeats in the visions of utopia that turned out to not become what they were, of the long fights for liberative struggles, especially for workers in the cause of work. And I think we see a Job that can identify with this. I mean, this passage itself is Job's beginning to lay out his case. In some ways, the book is always presented as a trial, a trial where Job's put on trial, and he has his friends who are all attorneys who try to give him the right advice and try to eke out the right response from Job. But Job remains resolute with his voice, because that voice is based on his vision, on what he's been seeing, on his own reconnaissance, looking over what's happened to him. If we're familiar with the book, we know that Job was struck with tremendous loss, and it kind of came all at once. For many of us, perhaps we've experienced great losses, and they do sometimes feel like they come out of nowhere and they come fast and furious. And we know that this is so often tied to the conditions of work, of wage labor, of the conditions of work that aren't enough to provide under our systems of economics for our basic needs. And this is why when we scanned over the work we had been doing over many years, it came to realize how the right to health stands really at the center of all that we're about: the health of our bodies, the health of our minds, the health of our spirit, the health of our psyche, and that none of this can be separated. And so we too, like Job, maybe have been sitting on the ash heap, on the dump heap, literally. That place is signed for us to like really rethink what is this all about, and wrestle with the deepest question of this kind of evil, these evil systems that continue to exploit, that continue to intimidate and oppress, because we have the audacity to believe in liberation. I think that's where Job stands as a wonderful example, and where someone like Antonio Negri can point us towards the authenticity of Job. I mean, somewhere in his book, he writes about, he kind of busts some myths that we have. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but sort of like to have the patience of Job. And he just talks about how nothing could be further from the truth, especially in the text of Job that's given to us. He's not patient. In fact, what Antonio Negri says, Job, the patient one, what an extraordinary legend has been constructed around this rebel, a veritable exorcism. In truth, nothing is more different from what the text itself says. There is no argument of his friends where Job is not accused of lacking patience. Job is not patient. He is powerful. These texts provide us with an image of a man who, through struggle and despite suffering and terrible misery, affirms his hold over being. Power is formed within pain, but unfolds in the relationship with being. That those themes of power, time, being, really kind of stand at the core of how Negri unpacks meaning from texts like the Book of Job. We wrestle with powers that try to oppress and exploit by retrieving the power of collective action and liberation that can only come, though, through conscious, dedicated study. And sometimes we have to sit on the ash heap of defeat and look at, like, some of the defeats, the failures but learn from them. And that's in some ways what we have been doing over a year of reconnaissance. We've been scanning that terrain of the enemy, trying to learn where we've come from, how we've got here, and more importantly, where are the new avenues, the new routes on the map of liberation, on that map of a railroad towards peace and hope and mercy. And I think it's not a stretch to see how also this connects with the gospel, where Jesus himself, doing very much the same kind of reconnaissance work. Right in Mark's gospel, Ched Myers has the best, I think, commentary on the Gospel of Mark in Binding the Strong Man. Jesus goes right to the center of oppression and authority and power, and he's immediately recognized by those sort of unclean spirits as one who has a new power and a new authority. And that was last week we had that sort of reckoning with the unclean spirit within the power structure And now Jesus is moving beyond that into literally communities, towns, streets, neighborhoods, and homes, and helping people find the healing there. So I think this is a Jesus that understands the road, the landscape of suffering, and that pain is can be an integral building block to democracy. That's what Tony Negri came to. That how pain is essential for the building block of democracy. We don't want to sit with it, and we don't want it, but our experiences and our reckonings with the painful parts of organizing, of life, of resistance and struggle are the building blocks towards a new liberation, new creative moments, new hopes, and new opportunities. They are the antithesis to fear, which is the weapon used by the enemy, the fear to make us afraid and fearful of our power, of our collective power especially. And I think Jesus went right into that as well. It's not a coincidence. He's got his followers following him to see how much healing is needed and necessary. And I guess as a final thought, when we want to scan that gospel for who needs healing and who wants healing, the whole town gathered at the door where Jesus was. We all need healing. Revolutionaries get sick, rebels get sick too, and we know this. I think all of us know this firsthand from our own lives and the lives of comrades. So what a important way to see that our reconnaissance work, our learning as we lead, is also learning through what we experience in our minds, in our bodies, collectively together especially, and to see that hope is what we're all aspiring to, and that hope is actually nothing less than the hope of liberation and recreation, creating a new world and new structures of society where everyone has what they need and no one goes without what they need. And so thanks for this journey through Job and Jesus and Harriet and now Terrell and Sydney and Amy and Ashley. We're going to hear more about, I think, what this year has brought forward from us.
Great. So I think first we're going to watch the video. Thanks, Sierra.
United Workers has been using our campaigns as a classroom for over 20 years. Last year, we embarked on our year of reconnaissance, where we listened, learned, and studied together as we organized across the state in order for us to collectively decide on our next campaign.
We knew that what we chose had to be capable of uniting poor people across race, region, and all other lines of division, and focus on our shared human rights. It needed to be a way for us to develop new leaders from the ranks of the poor. We needed to unify our base while exposing the weaknesses of the system that exploits us all.
In order to develop a campaign that could do all that, we needed to learn and study. In our winter and summer studies, we examined that system and our own history for insights that could help us make our choice.
We also learned directly from the people through outreach. We went all over the state of Maryland and beyond, listening to people tell us what's hurting them the most.
I wouldn't be stressed out knowing that every bill will be paid on time, no late fees, and the such. Once I can be able to pay everything, I'll be much easier going, much happier person.
I volunteered at 2 pantries. The lines continue to get longer and longer, so we just keep seeing the impact of the cuts in food stamps.
Since my rent and stuff getting high, will I be able to have a place to live by next year, or will I be homeless?
The division between people that's been developing over time, where people are fighting each other on everything, from politics, race, pretty much everything.
We weren't just looking for our next campaign. We were also looking for the future leaders of that campaign. People didn't just want to tell us their problems. They were ready to join us and work together to truly solve them at the root.
We learned from our strategic partner organizations like the Vermont Worker Center, Put People First Pennsylvania, the National Union of the Homeless, and the Nonviolent Medicaid Army by traveling to other states, studying their campaigns, and even participating in them.
Perhaps most importantly, we learned from each other. We brought our members together from across the state through outreach, home visits, justice jam events, to break out isolation and learn how poverty is impacting our people across rural and urban divides.
We saw poverty and the denial of our basic needs harming our health, the health of our families, and our communities. It is killing us. That is why we decided at our membership assembly to put this death-producing system on trial and demand our right to health. Wielding our new campaign, we will continue to organize, unite, and learn as we lead.
We have 0 thanks and 0 no's and 36 yeses.
It is unanimous.
Great. So yeah, that was a video that was put together by our media team, documenting last year's year of reconnaissance. And Sydney, who's one of our media team members, is gonna share a little bit his reflections on our year of reconnaissance.
So on that year of reconnaissance, that had me thinking about when we was in another part of Maryland. I want to say Cumberland. I'm not really sure, but anyway, I took 2 people as 2 fields, had a gentleman and a young lady. The gentleman that I was talking to was telling me how he had to struggle, you know, as far as his food and everything goes, because he doesn't really get that much food stamps at all. And I talked to the same young lady, to the I'm sorry. So I talked to the young lady that has children, and come to find out she is struggling as well, because again, there's the food stamp issue. And throughout the times that I've been traveling with United Workers, I actually come to discover that there's homelessness, not just in Baltimore, but like all over Maryland. That's my reflection on that one.
Thanks, Sydney.
You're welcome.
All right, and then Amy, we got Amy here from Cumberland, as well as Terrell as well. Amy, do you want to jump in there?
Sure. I'm Amy. I'm from Cumberland, up here in Western Maryland. I'm a new leader. I've learned a lot. But one thing that really sticks in my mind is that our last Justice Jam, we was talking about the healthcare system and how it is becoming like a major corporation. These bigger hospitals are buying up smaller hospitals and running out private practices. Then you got the cost of just simple cost of living going up, which is causing people not to be able to afford the food and basic necessities just to live. And yeah, there may be plenty of jobs out there, but those jobs are low wages, minimum wage. A lot of them aren't even full time. You might get 32 hours if you're lucky. And then you have people working 2 and 3 jobs. Some of the homeless people, even in my own community, are working poor. They work, but they cannot afford to pay their rent, to pay bills, but have food, to have the basic necessities they need, to include their medications. To me, it's like an economic genocide put forth upon us by the powers that be. And yes, that is a wild concept. It is a big concept, but that's basically what it is. It's like they're trying to keep us down. They're trying to kill us, to weed us out. So we cannot stand up. We cannot band together and stand against them.
Thanks, Amy. I guess Terrell, we'll go to you, and then we can also kind of talk amongst each other as well.
Yes. Since United Workers has gone through such a reflective and process around like our leadership development and political education, I just want to introduce myself first. So good evening. My name is Terrell, and I have been with United Workers for about 7 years now. I joined United Workers through their previous campaign, the 2020 campaign for fair development. It was around better housing, like land, community land trusts, and and why am I blanking on it? Jobs, developing, like doing the demolition. I currently am a co-coordinator of the Baltimore region of Maryland and support the base building and community care efforts in Baltimore and throughout Maryland. Through the work in United Workers, I've learned that poverty affects us all, and its ways are as diverse as they are tragic. Diverse because the impacts can present differently depending on your zip code, and tragic because they needn't occur in a country so full of resources in the first place. I myself grew up resource poor and spent a few years of my youth on the couches of family and friends, begging for the kindness of strangers. Something that unfortunately hasn't changed much in a quarter century since. Something I know though that is these outcomes and conditions can be changed. It is not an easy process, mind you. It's a slow and deliberate one which requires all of us to roll up our sleeves, jump in the pool, link arms in solidarity, and create the kind of wonderfully new and fiercely unsettling force that Dr. King called for. We have a nation that has not honored its debts or commitments to us or anyone, really. And so we, the poor and dispossessed, need to tack the mandate to their door and demand that beautiful bounty, which is ours more by birth than it is by nationality. In a word, we need to organize, organize, organize. Oh, yeah, and did I mention organize? Through this work, I have learned that a leader has to be committed to the task of replicating themselves. They need to understand that the work cannot be sustained by them alone. They need to be concerned as much with the process of learning because their learning and development is just as important as the folks around them. This fight for our lives is a marathon, not a sprint, people, which means we have to develop power that is as generational and group centered as it is transformative and amazing as we undertake it. I think of it in this way. Jesus called for us to love one another as we love ourselves. How can we do that in a more true way than calling out the senseless and needless abuse of the poor and shaping a world where all of us can share in the revolutionary power that is Jubilee? Thank you.
Thanks, Terrell. I'm wondering, and I really appreciate all these reflections, if we can maybe start a conversation, and Father Ty, feel free to jump in here too, but a question I would kind of throw back to you, Terrell, Sydney, Amy, and Father Ty is, well, one, what have you all learned through this process of organizing and connecting across these regional, racial, and partisan lines in the state of Maryland? And yeah, what have you all learned from that process? And I know it's not, it's not always easy. I mean, like Terrell, for instance, we've been doing these justice jams in Baltimore and Cumberland and Westminster. At times using the We Cry Justice book and those scriptures. But trying to build that unity of our class is not always easy.
That no matter where you come from, what your background is, I come from a very poor background that was in an area that was primarily white until I moved to Maryland and done some traveling as an adult. And I got, my first trip to Baltimore was the first time I actually seen the tent people. I've heard about them, seen them on TV, but never experienced it for real. And it's open minds, even in Vermont. Vermont is primarily white, but they are a more open state about, LGBTQ plus and so forth. So the struggles are there no matter where you're at, whether you're in inner city or more rural areas. We are all human and we all are struggling in the same ways or in similar ways.
And I mean, just to build on what you said, I think one of the biggest things that I've learned through this work is that the people that are dealing with these struggles want that sense of unity and solidarity and us coming across coming across those divisions, like tearing down those walls in our minds that like tells us that somehow we're different if we live in one part of the state or one part of the country than folks that live in another. Like I said, it may present differently, but it's the same root cause, and like people are far more moved by like recognizing that this struggle is a unified front than just kind words and like, yeah, go at it alone. And so I think there's such a hunger and like a desire that presents for people that um like just makes the work that we do and that we need to do with one another so much more accomplishable and easier.
So with myself, it made me think about how when I was out, when I was had everything I needed, and then I really didn't give homelessness or anything a second thought back when I was younger. But now that I personally experienced it and I've seen it, and then going out in places like Cumberland and Hagerstown to actually realize it's not just here in Baltimore. It's like all over, and it doesn't it just used to amaze me, but now it's like I know this struggle is not just set in just one area. It's all over Maryland now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just re-echo that too. So I had the real pleasure early in my ministry to be out in the Cumberland and Frostburg area, Western Maryland. And, I learned about our poverty there, to be quite honest. And it was a poverty that was familiar to me. I come from Central Illinois, from a city called Decatur. That is a city about half of its population is what it was. It reminded me so much of Cumberland, an industrial city that lost its industry, that lost its good jobs, and everything else has suffered. And it's lost that through capitalism and through this strive to like maximize profit, and it doesn't care about place, it doesn't care about town, it doesn't care about families or people. It's willing to go wherever it wants to go to make as much as it wants to make. And I guess then it was being in Baltimore for so long too, the opportunity to see how connected we really are, and that we needed to be connected in our organizing and in our movement building. And that wasn't just us, like the commitment to go statewide. I thought was a lesson learned through what we were experiencing very directly. And it might have been difficult to think of at first, but I think it was the right move at the right time. I wish we would have done it earlier, but we wouldn't have known necessarily where we were going. And I think it wasn't just the statewide; it was also and we've been doing this for quite a while, um, but returning in a year or so's time to really connect and listen to you folks across the movement in other places, in Pennsylvania, in Vermont, across the country, and to realize that we're all in this together. I think that helped us frame where we were going to go, where we were seeing that underground and above ground railroad deliberation, how it was connected to the work that all of us in Freedom Church of the Poor spaces and all of our movements are all about.
Yeah, and you made this point about the strategic partners and that being part of our, year of reconnaissance, and we went on several what we called recon missions. One to Vermont Workers Center to learn from them, and then also we went to Put People First Pennsylvania's membership assembly. But some of you went on that trip to Vermont, and I don't know if you want to share a little bit more about what you learned through that trip and what you learned from leaders there, that you took back with you.
Sure, I'll go first. No, having undertaken that trip was it allowed me to see um that one, United Workers wasn't the only one that was wrestling with like how do we actually like build and develop leaders and sustain leaders during these worsening times of uh, like strife and like difficulty in people's lives. Um, like often there is like to me there's a way that like not just poverty but like the boundaries that like exist like state, city, and things like that can like isolate you in a way that makes it feel like it's just you going in it and going through it. And having that experience of like joining others who were just as excited to hear like what we were doing as we were to hear about what they were doing and to like just kind of share notes and um like they invited us into at the time they were actually doing a like a little for organizer training and then like just a joining of their leaders for something akin to like a membership assembly. And they just invited us in to like participate and help facilitate that. And like even we even spent time just going around and like seeing the areas and like the different issues that they were like dealing with, and like it just helped to truly like develop the kind of togetherness and connectivity that's so needed to like actually uh take on this struggle for our lives.
I don't know if anyone else wanted to share about those recon missions, those trips at all. Well, one of the other questions I had is just about just the listening also to our base. The work we did in terms of outreach. Outreach is places where, poor people are going to meet their needs. The eviction canvases that we did, the home visits, the justice jams. What did we hear this past year where we've seen so many cutbacks in terms of these pandemic era protections and expanded benefits? What were the things that you were hearing from people?
Just to
I know
Amy.
when the one time I went, well, a couple times I went out to do some of the outreach at the food banks. It's been everybody's struggling. When I've done some of the home visits with people, just reaching out afterwards, it's even if someone is doing good, they recognize that there is a struggle with having enough people having enough food or having the money to just survive. A big thing in the area, a lot of people pointing out the drug epidemic as well as homelessness. And every day I'm seeing comments. All people are there because they want to be there, or they're there by choice, or they don't want to work. A lot of them do work. People don't realize a lot of these people that are homeless are working, but they do not make a livable wage. And that's what we're seeing a lot in our area up here in Cumberland. And I'm seeing a lot more youth that's coming out of the system, like foster care system, or even youth juvenile system where they got in trouble as a juvenile, and they don't have a support system. No one there to support them, to help them get on their feet. And we're talking like 18, 19, early 20-year-olds whose parents aren't in the picture or whatever. And it's like, where is this? How is the system failing? Where is the system failing? These kids that's just coming into the world.
Yeah, I would just add to what Amy shared that one of the things that I kept hearing over and over again from people, and it didn't take much to draw this out, that these realities, these realizations, like we're all been learning. We've all been learning since we were all hit. Everyone went through a Jobian experience with COVID and with the pandemic, with the shutdown, with the collapse of everything. And there was already extreme everyone was already pushed beyond the margins, economically, socially, and yet we saw in an instant the capacity to, in some ways, wasn't complete because there were still evictions happening here in Maryland. We supposedly had a moratorium on evictions. There were still people being evicted, but some people were being protected. The assistance for people for food, we figured out a way to increase benefits, and it didn't really cost. I mean, it was possible. Like people are now being able to name this reality of like this persistent sort of trope that we're living in times of scarcity. There's not enough, and we showed that there was an abundance when it was needed, but it was also so restricted, and now it's being taken away, and it's really causing even more suffering. So now the more people are showing up at the food pantries than ever before. More people are facing the threat or the reality of eviction, and we are like collapsing. People know that like government society assistance is collapsing, and right at the time when it's most critically needed, and at a time when we showed what we can actually do. That was and people were able to name that and just speak that truth very clearly, and it's been kind of one of the consistent things I've heard about how deeply impactful these cuts are, affecting working families, as Amy said, working families, in addition to those who are wanting to work but can't get the work, and can't get to work with dignity and to work with a living wage.
Earl, did you want to share?
Sure. Yes, I put in the chat that one of the things was that we heard from folks either losing their benefits altogether, which I mean didn't necessarily meet the need in the first place, or like having those benefits being reduced almost to like comically absurd levels. So folks who were like during the pandemic seeing $200 and plus that was helping to feed a family of 4 or 5 reduced to like $35. I say what can 30 what how much can you really eat a day on 5 people, $35? Just showing just how like cruel and inhuman this death producing system really is. And like also we and then just as like terrible, like seeing folks that were like, no, I'm not going to tolerate this, and like trying to pursue like pushing back and like getting those resources back, and like being told things like, well, you make a few dollars, you made a few dollars too much this month, or we had someone who they was facing like eviction, and they needed eviction like resources, and person telling them, well, this month you're $30 over, come back next month, maybe then we'll be able to help. And it's like, but I'm going to be evicted this month. And so that was like some of the just like terrible things that we were seeing, but also like seeing again people who were at once both like shocked to like see people like actively like going to the spaces where they are, and like talking to them, hearing their stories, and like creating spaces for us to like talk about these things, and like to truly actually like figure out what we do around them, but also seeing that this was an opportunity for them to also like take that work up, and like recognizing that they weren't the only ones that's like struggling with this. For every one of the people that we talked to, they were not just like excited to hear, but like when we were like, yeah, we should do a meeting together, and they were like, absolutely, because I know I'm not the only person in my neighborhood that's struggling. And so just recognizing that it's on all of us to like band together and push back.
Yeah, I mean, and we heard lots of issues, people dealing with, as we've named here, lack of affordable housing and quality, affordable housing, homelessness, food insecurity, lack of living wages, healthcare, all these sorts of issues. What, why the right to health? What, what made us come um, to this campaign around really focusing on our right to health and poverty as not just an economic crisis in our lives, but really a health crisis in our lives.
Trying to give others a chance to speak.
Everything affects our health, whether it's mental health, our spiritual health, or physical health. Whether you're stressed out because you can't pay the bills, whether you have to deal with trial and error with medications or go through a process of, well, we have to try this first. The insurance says we have to do this first before we can do this. We actually had a leader, one of our leaders up here that was going through some health issues. Before they could get on the medication that would actually help their health issue, they had to go through at least one or two other medications per their insurance before they could actually get the medication that would help them. Recently, in our local paper, we had a lady that her daughter is in her 30s and has a G-tube. She relies on a special type of formula for her nutrition to be able to survive. The insurance now says, oh, we won't pay for this anymore. But that is a need that person needs for her nutrition. And people are going through this and they're struggling. And whether you're a caregiver or whatever, all these things affect your health. If you're homeless, you're not getting the rest you need, and you're stressed. And then you try other things to try to relieve that stress, like drugs or alcohol, which again affects other parts of your health.
Thanks, Amy. I think we're actually kind of nearing the end. Really appreciate all of your reflections, and I think Father Ty,
Yeah, so we do have that time now for lifting up prayers from our prayers from the community here at Freedom Church of the Poor. Invite you to put prayer intentions, people, or things you want prayed for in the chat. We'll lift those up as well, because we believe that when we collectively name who and what we want to pray for together, our prayers are powerful. The recognition of where we need healing and want healing and hope for others especially. We know that we're in a time of tremendous need. Our hearts go, and they have been over many months now, for the Palestinians in Gaza, for immediate relief, for an immediate ceasefire, for an immediate end to hostilities, for an end to massacre, for an end to genocide. Not just the genocide in Gaza, but we could, as Amy, you rightly shared with us, the economic genocides affecting so many across the globe. For the people of Yemen, for the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, especially in the East, for all who are needing immediate peace, an immediate end to war, we can pray. We can also lift up all those who want healing and hope, for Connie, for her ability to recover her voice, for all who are needing healing. My church tradition, yesterday, February 3rd, is always the Feast of St. Blaise. We always give a blessing of throats on the Feast of St. Blaise. It always comes at a very timely moment in the winter season, in the north, at least, northern hemisphere, with We're trying to get over COVID. We're trying to get over RSV. We're trying to get over flu. We're trying to get over pneumonia. We're trying to get over strep throat, all these many diseases that affect us, but also the disease of losing our voice or having our voices drowned out or our voices not even heard, the voices that are being lifted up in the cries for freedom, the cries for liberation, the cries for hope and health. We can pray for those in our movements who have gone before us and who we still remember, and we remember them because we pray for the dead, but we fight like hell for the living, as Mother Jones asked us to do and urged us to do. And again, I don't know if there's any chat. Amy is a person in the hospital who can't keep her nutrition down. So for Miss Patsy, who's been in the hospital over for a week now, we want to lift up prayers for her. Other intentions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Father, but I do want to pray up for Caroline Smalls, who everybody at United Workers knows her as Lena, which is my friend. Because a couple of weeks ago, she was literally trapped in an elevator. She wound up having a seizure behind everything. So now she's literally too afraid to even get on one of them. And she lives on the 8th floor of our apartment.
Send prayers to her. Also from Alice, greetings from Colorado, asking for prayers for our Venezuelan asylum seekers who have been bused from Texas and need so much, mostly work permits and housing, yes, and for all asylum seekers and refugees and migrants who are seeking a new home in the midst of some hostile realities and communities. So definitely lift up our Venezuelan friends. And prayers for Reverend Savina and for her daughter. Thank you, Sierra. And I guess we can also just, one thought I will conclude with, like, as wrapping up prayer and hope, and maybe recall earlier from the beginning when Ashley talked about that slide on our year of reconnaissance, and we had that image from that painting from Paul Collins, the Underground Railroad, and with Harriet Tubman leading fellow travelers on that road to freedom and liberation. Recall that image. I shared with Ashley and our other United Workers, whenever I saw that image for the first time, and I still do, I see a representation of the flight into Egypt, of Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus fleeing for their lives in a dangerous night, in a dangerous terrain. I think of the Exodus, the flight out of Egypt for the same reasons. I think of those many passages that people make. We can think of our Venezuelan asylum seeker friends that are asking for prayers, all who make a very difficult, dangerous journey and need companions and need guides, need lookouts, need conductors, need ticket takers, need all those people that work the railroads of freedom and liberation. And one of them is a poet. I'm going to collect a final prayer from Langston Hughes. This poet is a poem called I Look at the World. It was found written in pencil in the back of one of his books in his library on his shelf. The book was an anthology of revolutionary poetry by a collection of other authors, but he hand wrote in pencil a couple of poems, and this is one of them called I Look at the World. I think it's about reconnaissance and learning as we lead, walking and talking, teaching and learning. I look at the world from awakening eyes in a black face, and this is what I see. This fenced off narrow space assigned to me. I look then at the silly walls through dark eyes in a dark face, and this is what I know, that all these walls oppression builds will have to go. I look at my own body with eyes no longer blind, and I see that my own hands can make the world that's in my mind. Then let us hurry, comrades, the road to find. Amen, everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight.
I think we have some announcements quickly from Sierra.
Thanks, Ashley. And thank you to all our comrades from the United Workers of Baltimore. I feel like I learned a lot from you all's experience, and I look forward to just continuing to be in this struggle together, because this is a very protracted struggle. And thank you, Father Ty, for those beautiful prayers for the people, and Ashley for your artwork always. Um, we have a few things coming up. In a couple of weeks, we will be starting our Lenten season. And so next Saturday, we're going to have a kickoff conversation on lessons from liberation theology in times of genocide. And so we're bringing together folks from Palestine, from the US, from different faith traditions or backgrounds, to talk about how liberation theology guides our understanding of the moment that we're in and our responsibility to act. We also the Cairo Center, Freedom Church of the Poor, we're supporting a pilgrimage for peace that has been, organized by Faith for Black Lives, the National Council of Churches, Rabbis for Ceasefire, CARE, Hindus for Human Rights, and many others. It's a peace pilgrimage that is beginning in Philadelphia, February 14th. That's Ash Wednesday, and taking faith leaders, artists, organizers on a journey to Washington, D.C. to demand a permanent ceasefire and for the liberation of Palestine. And finally, and as always, you can find and post an action and the call for ceasefire near you by going to GazaIsPalestine.com/protest. Thank you all so much for being on tonight. I feel very moved and very full moving into this next week of struggle. And so thank you all for being on tonight, and we will see you again next week. Much love.